Joining me now, Democratic strategist and former advisor to the Obama campaign, Amisha Cross, and Brendan Buck, MSNBC political analyst, previously served as press secretary to former VP candidate Paul Ryan. Welcome to you both. Amisha, you first here, because the New York Times opinion writers described this speech as low energy. We saw for ourselves the rambling nature of it, that it was boring as well, and then filled with the usual lies. How much of a gift was this for the Democrats, whomever ultimately faces Donald Trump?
I think that the magnum opus, so to speak, for Donald Trump at the RNC, that speech is a major gift. Christmas came early for Democrats in some senses. Because remember, this was a speech that was touted as one that was supposed to be unifying. It was supposed to be Trump taking a different tone. This was a lighter, more conciliatory Donald Trump post the unfortunate series of events that we saw following the assassination attempt. However, within the first 12 minutes, which I would argue were, unity that was written by some pretty strong speech writers, he abandoned the script entirely, went on his own for the next hour and a half, and returned to the MAGA bombastic, anti-immigrant, racist. We've seen this story before. The 2020 negating the results of the 2020 election, calling out the people who he feels did him wrong, be it whether it was in the court system, the justice system, or individuals who chose to prosecute his crimes in public. This was Donald Trump doing what Donald Trump does best, reaching out to his base. He showcased that the expansion that people might have assumed the rest of the RNC was trying to do on the days leading up to his speech, none of that mattered. Donald Trump was speaking to the MAGA base. He was essentially finishing the speech that I don't think he was able to finish. Obviously, he wasn't able to finish on the day of that assassination attempt. Donald Trump is who he always has been. And if anybody forgot, we know 4 years ago is in the past. If anybody forgot who Donald Trump was, he put it on full display.
It wasn't just Donald Trump, Brendan. We also heard extremist rhetoric from other speakers at the convention. Let's get a little listen to some of that.
The Democrats' economy is of, by, and for illegal aliens.
And the sexualization and indoctrination of our children.
And the Democrats have handed over control of my state, Arizona's border, to the drug cartels.
Just because you call yourself the president doesn't mean that much inherently. I can call my dog the CEO of Hewlett Packard. It doesn't mean she is.
Charming. How different is this rhetoric from 4 or 8 years ago, Brendan?
Well, I think that's pretty consistent for where the party is, the type of people who have taken over some of the more familiar faces that we've known from the Republican Party for a long time. And there were a lot of people, my old boss included, and people like Mitt Romney who didn't even attend. I do have to say, though, I think this was overall a pretty successful convention for Republicans. Now, some of that rhetoric and some of those kooky characters aside, this was a party that looked like it had its act together. It was energetic, it was enthusiastic, and there was not the infighting that we have seen. The images of the first Trump convention where they're literally on the floor trying to take down the delegate count for him. So this was much more inviting relative to what a normal Trump-like event is. And his speech, as long and as boring and as old school as it was, I think was perfectly fine, because he didn't need a game-changing speech. He's winning right now, and if he bored people, that's perfectly fine for him. There was no, I don't think the direction of the campaign certainly didn't change through this convention, and it probably only just bolstered their case as the clear frontrunners.
Yeah, but Brendan, did it buy him any independent voters? Did it buy him anybody who isn't already under the Trumpian tent? Did it buy him anybody outside of that arena in Milwaukee?
I think it might have. So there are a lot of people right now who are looking at the two candidates and saying, I don't know that I can vote for Joe Biden given what I've seen from him, but I really am not sure about Donald Trump either. And what Donald Trump did, while being boring and weird, was he was far less scary than he can be. He was far less angry than he can be. He was far less dark than he can be. And there was a lot of enthusiasm there. And I think that may have given a lot of people permission to vote for him. Now, I don't think that the Trump campaign is trying to win over independents. Let me be very clear about that. Their campaign strategy is to turn out as many Republican voters as possible. At the same time, I don't think they scared away as many independents as they potentially could have if Trump was left up to his own devices.
Can I just ask you, do you think might be a big difference? Because he's also 8 years older Might he be a little bit tired of that game that he puts on all the time?
I don't know. I mean, the speech itself that they wrote for him was much shorter than what he did. It seemed like he was the ad-libbing is a bit self-indulgent. He likes going off script. He likes doing those things. He loves doing the one-liners. I think he actually is. You know, if you're going to compare the two, that's a winning argument for Donald Trump as well.
So, Misha, we have some new reporting that Biden's family has started talking about prospects of an exit plan for him as the nominee if he were to decide to step aside. What do you think is the final straw? What do you think is the deciding factor for President Biden and his family?
President Biden. I think that he spoke very vigilantly just a few days ago when he said that, you know, this is his decision and his decision alone. And, you know, he also mentioned the good Lord. But I think that unless it was, you know, the Lord tapping on his shoulder, this is a decision that Joe Biden would have to make. And thus far, he has not come out and told us anything else. I think that, you know, the Biden-Harris ticket is one that fully recognizes that there are some hurdles that they have to overcome as a campaign, that there have been some sidelines, unfortunately, due to the debate, but also due to, you know, his recent COVID diagnosis. But the campaign is still going. We know that Kamala Harris is out on the campaign trail today. The surrogates have not stopped. There are multiple cities that they are visiting over the next few days. And if it is to be believed, which I don't think that there's a reason not to, we've heard from Joe Biden's doctors. He is feeling very well. It's not like he has a very intense form of COVID-19. He will be back on the campaign trail again very soon himself.
Let me ask you about the talk, Amisha, about some sort of a mini primary. Again, lots of hypotheticals if Joe Biden were to leave the race. Is that not fair to Kamala Harris?
I not only think that it's not fair, I think it is a completely ignorant notion. Looking at the calendar thus far, moving towards the DNC, there is no time frame in which this makes sense. In addition to that, we know that Biden already has how much of a delegate count that matters, thousands of those. And Kamala Harris is the sitting vice president. Any idea that you can skip over a sitting vice president, the first Black woman sitting vice president, mind you, a member of the community that literally brought Joe Biden to the dance, that got him through the South Carolina primary, and the most consistent voting bloc of the Democratic Party, I think it's quite frankly disrespectful.